On the 15th of September 1991, anomalous objects were seen by astronauts on board the Space Shuttle Discovery. The objects, filmed during NASA's STS-48 mission, were dismissed by space agency officials at the time as nothing more than space debris or ice crystals. But when this man, Dr. Jack Kasher, PhD, of Nebraska State University, failed in his attempt to make NASA's ice crystals explanation fit by using 5 different scientific scenarios, he formed the conclusion that one of the objects in question, seen here performing an abrupt right-angle maneuver, apparently to avoid 2 missile-like streaks, was nothing less than an intelligently controlled spacecraft. Other anomalous activity recorded since has baffled even the experts. For example, what did veteran NASA astronaut Story Musgrave make of this anomalous plasma-like sphere which emerged from beneath clouds on the 1st of December 1996 during NASA's STS-80 mission?
I don't know what it is. That one is really impressive.
Here, during the mere docking and undocking procedure with mission STS-84, scores of anomalous objects appear, while others are seen to perform extraordinary maneuvers in close proximity to the space station. Footage such as this was recorded and logged over a 5-year period by Martyn Stubbs, who, as a cable TV station manager based in Vancouver, Canada, was granted permission to deploy his station's satellite array to serve as a downlink to access space shuttle transmissions. After viewing and carefully studying hour upon hour of some 2,500 hours of collected videotape, Martyn became convinced that, in places, the footage contained stark evidence of 2 types of space phenomena that he construed as being extraterrestrial in origin. In the late summer of 1999, U.F.O magazine's Russell Callahan flew out to Vancouver to spend a week questioning Martyn and analysing the footage. Suitably impressed by what he had seen and heard, mechanisms were put in place to ensure that some of the most important and unusual film sequences were disseminated far and wide. That process began with a brief showing of the footage at the Congreso Mundial UFO conference held in Acapulco, Mexico on the 12th of December 1999. 1 month later, some of the footage began appearing on special TV monitors at a special exhibition held in Fremantle, Perth, Western Australia. On Saturday, the 15th of January 2000, Guido Negro, director of the SETI radio telescope at Golden Grove Observatory in Western Australia, had this to say after viewing some of the NASA footage.
The footage that we saw came to the truth and really are showing an alien spacecraft or something like that. I say that if there is a cover-up, the people who are doing this cover-up are an enemy of entire Earth race, because we are not children and we must know if, and we must know the truth. It doesn't matter if there are people that are not, they don't know how to handle the truth. Well, the majority of us will, and if there is a cover-up, I think it's time that the cover-up goes.
Barely 2 months later, on Saturday the 11th of March 2000, Graham Birdsall, editor of UFO magazine, together with Russell Callahan, made a 3-hour presentation on the footage at the 9th International UFO Congress and Film Convention held at Laughlin, Nevada. At the same time, the facts as were then known, together with relevant audio and stream video sequences, were freely uploaded onto UFO magazine's website, targeting a worldwide audience of potentially millions. However, despite their best efforts, little interest was expressed by the media in either the story or the footage. Perhaps in anticipation at this, Graham and Russell elected to produce what would go on to become an award-winning and best-selling video documentary entitled The Secret NASA Transmissions, The Smoking Gun. It was a documentary designed to enable viewers to study some of this startling footage at close quarters, to see Martyn Stubbs relate in his own words what first persuaded him to access NASA's downlink, and to learn what resulted from his efforts to persuade members of the scientific community to both examine and then comment about the footage. In that documentary, Martyn alluded to the dialogue he struck up with Dr. Joseph A. Newth III, head of NASA's Astrochemistry Branch Laboratory for Extraterrestrial Physics at Goddard Space Flight Center, Greenbelt, Maryland. Martyn referred to Professor Weinberg of Simon Fraser University in Canada, who expressed genuine amazement on viewing the footage and who told him that it had to be there, doing exactly what it was. Martyn also mentioned how one of the chief designers of the Hubble Space Telescope walked out of the Vancouver Planetarium when asked to comment about the footage by a close friend and working colleague. Martyn also alluded to his close ties to the Canadian Space Agency and how the footage came to be deemed the most popular underground tape among the astronauts. Moreover, Martyn alleged that one of the Canadian astronauts, who had spoken out of turn about the footage, was removed from the Space Shuttle program barely a week before he was due to be blasted into space. However, Martyn said that for their protection, he couldn't reveal certain names at that time. Later that same year, in September 2000, Martyn Stubbs travelled to England to speak at the 19th Leeds International UFO Conference. Once more, he found himself unable to go into specific detail about some of the key players in this extraordinary story. However, 12 months on, during a 10-day visit to England in September 2001, Martyn was finally able to provide the missing pieces in what turned out to be a candid and remarkable interview. Martyn, September 2000, and you travelled over from your home in Bowen Island, Vancouver, Canada, to attend the 19th Leeds International UFO Conference at the University of Leeds, where you talked at length about some of these extraordinary anomalous images that you have described as Space Phenomena 1 and Space Phenomena 2 in the resultant video documentary of this topic that has come to be known as the Secret NASA Transmissions, The Smoking Gun. Now, that particular conference, you mentioned an individual, not by name, who played an integral, a key part, if you like, a role in bringing this information out to the fore. That man's name, later transpired, was Bob Sutherland. Now, for the benefit of our viewers, can you tell us a little bit more about Bob Sutherland and why, in the first place, you couldn't mention him by name in September last year?
Well, Bob Sutherland absolutely did play an integral part. When I first started recording the images, and I was told by MUFON's Canadian National Director not to air them or release them, and I resigned. I put them out just a little bit on the air in Vancouver with a question mark, what are these? And I received a phone call, and it was Bob Sutherland. And he identified himself as Canada's first space artist, official space artist. And I asked him why he would possibly, be calling me. And he said he was very, very interested in phenomena too, because they didn't fit the typical patterns that one would do if they were trying to fake something. And he was very interested in seeing more. Very sincere. And so I invited him down. And Bob viewed the images, got just as excited as I did, and he said to me, well, I actually know this Professor Weinberg, who has this behavioral lab, lots of PhDs. How would you like to present him?
And where did Professor Weinberg work at that time?
At Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. And he was the... So I went with Bob, and he took me to a place I never knew existed, at Simon Fraser. I'd been up there a lot. It's the only place you could get a parking space. And we went in, and Bob, it turns out, had done work with him. And I, at this point, was not sure of what. I hadn't grilled or questioned Bob on Professor Weinberg. But when I got in there, I saw this was certainly an amazing place. They were analyzing voice things from orca whales, and they were looking at brain scans with colored things, etc. And Dr. Weinberg did not see phenomena 1. We showed him phenomena 2.
So by phenomena 1, what we're talking about here, for the benefit of people who are not familiar with your description of this, we're talking about sphere-like, anomalous sphere-like activity that are actually visible on the TV screen, as opposed to space phenomena 2, which are very, very quick, very sharp to the untrained eye.
Exactly.
So he's not looking at spheres, he's looking at this space phenomena 2. And we know that his reaction was one of amazement.
Amazement. And that's what made it so interesting, is I knew going in that if that he was a very a top person in terms of thinker. And I felt that instead of just getting the usual ice cube kind of answer, that this would be very challenging. So at first he tolerated us, and then he watched it, and then he got excited, and then he took over the control. And at one point, I was talking to Bob, and he actually grabbed the whole of him and said, "Look at this one," kind of thing, and et cetera, et cetera.
Now can I just intervene at that point, because I want to move the story on a little bit.
Exactly,
but
I understand.
It's fair to say that Professor Weinberg expressed this initial amazement and interest in space phenomena 2.
Yes.
But it's also fair to say that later on, when his name, if you like, became publicised through the documentary, he, if you like, gave backward. He denied even meeting you or looking at any of these images.
Yeah. Which shocked me.
Yeah. I wonder, what was the reaction of Bob Sutherland when he got to learn that Professor Weinberg was denying all knowledge of that meeting?
Bob just wanted to stay out of the politics of that, and I really have to say that it was your effort at UFO magazine to email him back and remind him, and he quickly reversed his position to one of, and I think that's safe to say that he just said, "Well, I don't remember the conversation quite the way you remember it," but he's a very, very nice, very intelligent man, and I'm sure he remembered every word.
Yeah.
And the other thing was that he had told me some private things, his private thoughts on the whole gamut of what might be going on. And I think what happened after you reminded him, UFO magazine reminded him, I think he remembered that I had kept his confidence. That I had not talked whatsoever about any of the private, personal information, because I understood his position was very touchy. And he was the first scientist. I mean, I didn't realize that Bob Sutherland had done so much work with the Canadian Space Agency.
Yes, because you mentioned earlier that both Professor Weinberg and Bob Sutherland had worked on a project.
Yes.
Can you give us a bit more information about specifically what that project was?
Well, yes. The project, when our first female astronaut, Roberta Bondar, who's a very big hero in our country, she went into space. And when she came down, they had to put her away for a while from the public because she was in a deep depression. And then I learned later that she wasn't the first one. So Bob and Professor Weinberg had previously been working with NASA on a few other projects, which, rather than get into that, I'll just continue. He was asked to, because he was friends with the individual at the Canadian Space Agency who picks the astronauts.
Okay, well, let's mention her name. Because we've published it.
Yeah.
Recently.
Yes.
We're talking about Lena Toomey.
Yes, we are talking about Lena Toomey.
Was this a platonic relationship?
It was. They were friends. I mean, they're absolutely. Bob is happily married, and he's with he has a son.
Right.
Yes, but
I think it's important to put this relationship, if you like, into context.
Yes.
But they were good friends.
Very good friends, and he really respected her, and she respected him, because what he did was he had to figure out using his knowledge of art. He's a very well-known international artist in the arts community around the world. And what he had to figure out, his contribution was, is it something visual that is causing them problems in space? And his conclusion was, yes, it absolutely was. And he proposed a series of circles.
We're talking now about the project with Professor Weinberg.
With Professor Weinberg, but the two of them worked on together, and Bob came up with a series of drawings that they placed on the next shuttles, around the shuttle, under the belief that there wasn't enough familiar curvatures and things that for the eye to, there was so much unfamiliar territory in space.
Now, when we talk about platonic relationships here on Earth, it would be fair to say that you learned from Bob Sutherland that life wasn't exactly a bed of roses in outer space either, was it?
Completely surprised me, because at that time they were, all the astronauts were being paraded out as great friends. They always got along, and everything was wonderful in space. And Bob shocked me when he said that it wasn't just Roberta Bondar, and that there was hostilities. They were arguing with the control rooms. They were arguing with each other, and part of it was just plain a depressive something inside them that came out in space.
And presumably that insight, if you like, into an astronaut's other life in space came from his friend Lena Toomey.
It did.
But presumably following on from that, the kind of ramblings and noises that came down from the Space Shuttle were not, if you like, on a public open line.
No, and just to segue to where we are now, for those interested, NASA is now slowly beginning to let the stories out about how they are now looking at it and how it has been, and they've completely verified everything we've said. What Bob said, what Professor Weinberg was dealing with.
Yeah. Now, if I can, one of the great sentences, one of the great remarks, if you will, and that has been used to good effect in, if you like, promoting the secret NASA transmissions, the smoking gun, is this comment where we're led to believe that this footage was put on a videotape.
Yes, I did put it
and it got somehow to the astronauts, who labelled it, you know, their favourite underground tape.
Yes.
Tell us about that, because how did it get to the astronauts for them to sort of come up with that view?
Well, it got to the astronauts through me and Bob Sutherland. Bob sent Linda the tape, and she passed it among the astronauts, because we were at that time learning everything we could about, and I had no idea, really, honestly, of just how important she was.
I think at this point people would be interested to know, how many sort of astronauts on the Canadian Space Agency program are we talking about here? Are we talking about a handful, 2, 3, or more? How many do you know or are aware of actually got to see that tape? And indeed, whether anyone else within the Canadian Space Association, researchers, technicians, engineers and so on, actually got to see the tape?
It was more than a handful. At first I thought it was a handful, but it seemed to be getting around the astronauts maybe were taking it home. And the most interesting part about this is that the astronaut who was most interested, who was sort of the astronaut who was giving it out, you know, in charge of it, was Colonel McKay, who...
This is Colonel Mike McKay.
Mike McKay, who we couldn't name last time either. And until Bob Sutherland, you know, allowed us to...
We'll talk about, you know, why it was that Bob Sutherland suddenly decided to go public in a minute. But this was an important figure.
Exactly, and he got pulled off a flight, STS-74, I think 4 days before.
So when you and Bob learned that Major Mike Mackay had been pulled off this space shuttle program, as you say, within less than a week of launch, and what was your reaction? What was your response?
Well, at first I wondered if he was the astronaut that was the one that Lena had said, you know, was most interested, and the one that was in charge of distributing it among other astronauts and other space personnel. And so I put in a call. Bob actually put the call in, and I was there, and she confirmed that it actually was. But it was right after then, that's when they started talking coldly to us in a cold, you know.
Yeah, two questions spring from that. First of all, did Bob get any sort of response or reaction or indication from Lena when he either spoke to her on the telephone then or met with her later, that somehow Major Mike Mackay's removal, if you like, from the space shuttle mission wasn't, as the official explanation was given, for medical reasons? And secondly, did Lena at that time, and I know it's a difficult question for you to answer, you know, was her relationship, if you like, with Bob suddenly affected as a result of that? So two very relevant questions.
Well, the answer to the last question was yes, the relationship was severed at that point. I think that's when everything changed. And we decided, we did ask her, by the way, the answer to your first question. We said, was it because of the tape? And she said, of course, no, but I can't tell you, and we're not in any position that we have to tell you why he was pulled off the flight. Well, this doesn't happen. He's a very highly trained, in fact, if people look him up, you'll see that he was one of the most trained astronauts. Now, he was a mission specialist, and he was replaced by Chris Hadfield, who just recently, just a month ago, was Canada's first spacewalking astronaut. Now, Chris Hadfield has since, after doing a photo opportunity, been posted to Moscow for 5 years. And so that's basically, so we're not going to see, because I was going to talk to him, and we won't get access to him.
Okay. When you mentioned this individual, who we now know to be Bob Sutherland at Leeds in September 2000, you hoped, you told the audience that you hoped that you would at some point in the future, in the near future, be able to release not only his name, but the circumstances and all the rest of it. And on your return to Vancouver, tell us what happened that led to this.
Well, when I got back to Vancouver, Bob was very sick. He's ill, and so he decided that he didn't think he had a lot of time left, and he wanted the story to come out. He changed his mind. So he gave me the okay to tell nearly the whole story. And that was printed in, I think, the December Weinberg and Bob Sutherland, and that has just come out in Vancouver. Bob was protecting his son. Now, why would Bob protect his son? The answer is his son is one of, if not, has the highest IQ of any child in Canada.
Tell us a little bit more about the name of Bob Sutherland's child, his age, and just how clever he really is.
Well, Bob Sutherland at the time didn't want his son to be a part of the story, even after he was willing to name names and tell his full story to us, or to me. And I was able to tell U.F.O magazine. But now his family decided that they couldn't hold it back. And the Vancouver Sun newspaper on September the 8th featured a giant story and a large picture of his son, Sean Sutherland. Now, Sean now is 12, and he has an IQ, an unmeasurable IQ. It's over 190. And Dr. Weinberg was also mentoring many gifted children in this special lab and facility that he had. And
about what time would that be?
Well, we were talking, yeah, that would that would be when Sean was younger. I mean, this
a lot younger, so because
yeah.
he's no longer at Simon Fraser University.
No,
is he?
no, that's something I should point out, that Dr. Weinberg has since gone on, found a little community, and he's the mayor of it.
And that community is where?
It's a little community that's a sub-community of Port Moody which is a suburb of Vancouver. It surprised me. He ran for mayor. But he still is working privately with NASA. And what was very interesting is when I was in Leeds for the 19th conference, Bob Sutherland told me when I got back that Dr. Weinberg contacted him and asked him if he could work with Sean, literally wanted to hire Sean. And at that time, they wanted Sean to integrate and be a regular boy as long as he could in the school system.
But what is doctor? Is he a doctor? Is he a professor? How does he go by? Because you've used two references.
Well, he's a professor and a doctor.
He's a professor and a doctor. What's he most commonly known by now, apart from mayor?
Mayor Weinberg.
Mayor Weinberg. Well, you know, it seems an obvious question, but I'm going to put it to you anyway. What is Mayor Weinberg, previously a doctor and professor at Simon Fraser University, doing only recently, trying to, you know, approach Bob Sutherland, for him to approach Sean, who's only 12 years old,
yes,
who's got this fabulous IQ, for what purpose, for what reason? You know, in other words, has he got some other capacity? Has anybody tried to find out?
Well, Bob's message to me was that he's still working with the Canadian Space Agency, which is really working with NASA, and that whatever he's working on, that Sean could help him. Now, Bob was not happy about that, because Bob, of course, said no, just the same way he asked us not to release Sean's name. But now that Sean's turning 13, you know, he's going to be a teenager, and it's time for him to head for MIT. And so Bob said no. Then they decided, just like I say, September 8th, 2001, they published in our paper in Vancouver, British Columbia, two pictures of Sean, just talking about what an extraordinary child he was. He's not only he's not only plays every instrument, but he's written symphonies, arranged symphonies, but he suddenly changed and asked his dad if he could go into astrophysics, theoretical quantum, etc. Absolutely out of this world.
But there's no evidence to suggest that one of the reasons why Sean wishes to go into sort of astrophysics has anything to do with the footage or the anomalous activity, or is there?
Oh, I think so, absolutely. Sean was a wonderful boy. You take him to the local hamburger joint, and he's just a boy. But he was as interested in asking me about these things as Bob was, and it was like talking to a man. He was a very, very astute person. Where, for instance, where someone would say, "Now, how did spaceships fly?" It's actually, this happened in his class, and most kids said flames come out the back, whereas Sean said they traveled between atoms, and you know, it was, so the teacher phoned and said, you know, how smart is he? And then and then the final straw for Bob, because realized they couldn't keep a lid on it, was the school board had, without their permission, tested the boy. and found that just how smart he was. And so, so that's why I can say that Sean Sutherland is the connection, the person that we were trying to protect while he was just in normal school. But now, I know we've had an influence. I have a picture of myself with Bob. Bob does not like to be photographed. And I have this photo, and I was very, very proud that I took a Polaroid for me and a Polaroid for him. And then I said, "What'd you do with your picture?" And he said, "Sean put it up in his room." Sometimes when I phone, Sean answers the phone, and he says, "Would you like to hear my latest symphony?" And then he sits at the phone because it takes Bob a while to come up from downstairs. Now, Bob had to take experimental chemotherapy treatment in January, and phoned me, and said, "Please, I can't talk to anyone, even you, until I'm through this." And that was scary for me because he's a very wonderful person. And he made it, because when after the Nevada conference this year, there was a phone call on my answering machine, and it was from Bob, and he was congratulating us in the most joyful way for getting the NASA secret transmissions out, and also for the fact that it was recognized as the best documentary long subject of the year. And he actually scolded me. He said, "Why didn't you phone me?" And but so I knew he was okay. And
how much did, if you like, getting that award mean to you and Bob?
A lot. It did, because it meant that what we'd always wanted to do was happening. It was more confirmation that people were watching the video. People were getting access to the video. And that's really all we wanted all along. It wasn't about money or anything. It was about everybody should see this and make their own mind up. And the response also at Leeds is enormous.
Now, when you talk about response at Leeds, you obviously travelled to the 20th Leeds International UFO Conference at our invitation.
And I thank you.
And we're here, obviously, to do some further research. We spent a good week doing that now.
Yes.
But I think it would be fair to say that a heck of a lot of the people were truly surprised when you were introduced there, because, of course, you were not due to be introduced. Nobody knew you were there. But I think it's also fair to say that many members of the public who've obviously seen some of this footage now they took the opportunity, didn't they, to sort of put a lot of questions to you. What were the kind of questions, because you were often surrounded by a lot of people, what were the kind of questions people were asking you, ordinary people, about you, about the footage?
Well, first of all, people were very, very kind in asking about my health. But
how is your health, by the way?
It's good. It's good. You know, this tested my stamina, and
presumably you and Bob are a lot healthier now than you were earlier.
I'm very happy to say that. I'm very happy, and I was very worried about Bob, and when he scolded me on the phone for not phoning her immediately, I knew he was back.
So apart from questions about your health, what were ordinary people asking you?
They were asking me a whole variety of things. It wasn't like a repetitive set of questions. Some people wanted to know more about the tether. Other people wanted to know about phenomena 2. And many people asked if I brought more video. I did a lot of listening, but I really don't believe that I should be telling people what it is or what it isn't. Or I just basically listened to their questions and answered them as best I could. But I was amazed at the fact that people weren't repeating themselves. Everybody had a different segment of the tape that they wanted to talk about, and there was a phenomenal interest in phenomena 2 now.
Now, doesn't that then, if you like, disappoint you immensely when the same level of interest, or not even remotely the same level of interest, has been expressed both by the media at large, apart from isolated publicity, but more to the point, by the mainstream scientific community. First of all, the media. How have the media reacted to this from Martyn Stubbs' perspective?
Well, there's two answers to that. Number one, within Canada, I've been holding this information back and not allowing interviews and things because I just didn't want Bob Sutherland, until he was ready, they would have dug right into that. So Canada will probably, and secondly, the Canadian Space Agency has kept quiet because they know what's happened within their agency. They know the astronauts, if they've seen it. And as Lena said to me, this is the favorite underground tape of the astronauts. And they know all this.
Okay, so that's one reason to, if you like, protect Bob Sutherland.
Yes.
What's the second reason?
Well, I've actually been, I've been on American radio, and I've had nothing but positive, really positive. I think I've fallen in love with Texas, for instance. People have been very, very good, but very interested, and we've had total silence now from NASA because they are completely unable to answer questions anymore. And
yet, despite this, the occasional radio interview and such
to me
like,
it's big.
Nationally, internationally, it's obviously been left, if you like, to the auspices of U.F.O. magazine,
well, that's why
through its publication and through the website and through the video and all the rest of it, and to disseminate this and to tell the story. But nonetheless, up until recently, it's been pretty disappointing, if you like, the take-up. Now, how surprised were you then when, I mean, we'll return back to the media a little bit later, specifically about DirecTV. But how surprised were you when, in stark contrast, if you will, to mainstream scientists elsewhere, Professor Louis Frank not only spoke positively about the footage in written correspondence to you, but agreed this year to say as much again in a Fox TV News special broadcast across the States. How surprised were you, and how significant do you think Professor Louis Frank could be in the future in all of this?
Well, I think Louis Frank is a hero. He stood by, he has not backed down. He's even, this is something you don't know actually, he's even starting to discuss what he thinks they might be.
This is, if you like, coupled with his theory about microcomets.
Yes,
and
because
all that
NASA
kind of
had
thing.
to recognize that Louis Frank had discovered some kind of a phenomena in space on their satellites. It's exactly the same as we did. And so he proposed that they were house-sized comets of water that fall into the Earth in the thousands during the day. And of course, NASA had to say, yes, we do have dark spots on our satellites, hold a press conference and anoint this as scientific video, because it's theirs. But then they tore into him privately that his theory on house-sized comets, they would have hit satellites with their water, etc. This is ridiculous. And he just is stuck by his guns. But what he's talking about now is that they would have hit satellites, and so he's saying they're diverting around satellites. And I'll leave it at that, because the one thing we want to always do is make sure that we've checked the information out thoroughly, had lots of conversations. And another reason I'm not disappointed at all is because the media are usually the last to find out anything anyway, because there's all kinds of powers to be, and who knows. But the scientists have been talking a lot, and I have, which I brought for you, and I hope we'll, over the next few months, let the public have access to some of this. Emails on discussions on Lou Frank's theory, on just about every aspect of the smoking gun tape. And this is just an idea of the kind of things we have. We're still in conversation. I'm excited because they're scientists. And I don't think the media, treat this subject seriously. So I don't get disappointed because the things really are not about me, or and when they do reports, they mysteriously leave out the tether footage, for instance, and things like that. But the scientists are looking at it. The scientists are talking to us, not just Louis Frank. And
now,
that's
presumably it's not just members of the public that are looking at this. It's not just Louis Frank that's looking at this. And presumably stemming from that, it would be fair to say that quite a number, I would suspect, of scientists subscribe to DirecTV,
yes, they
America's largest pay-per-view system.
Of course, it has more people, DirecTV, than the entire population of Canada that access it. That's how.
Well, we've been given a figure of about 35 million.
Well, that's more than we have.
And we know, for example, that it stretches out to subscribers as far afield as Mexico.
Yes, I've heard that. And it surprised me.
It's been airing throughout the month of September.
Yes. I phoned my wife, and she told me that it's being picked up in Canada, and that I've already got phone calls that I have to, when I get back.
I was going to say, are you hoping, as perhaps we're all hoping here, that this is going to generate an awful lot of response from people who, for whatever reason, haven't seen Fox TV, haven't picked up a copy of UFO magazine, haven't seen the video of the secret NASA transmissions, but now, through access via DirecTV, across, if you like, North America and certainly Central America, Mexico and what have you, are you hoping that amidst the response, hopefully a positive response, I'm sure it will be, that there might be one or two, if you like, even more key people stepping forward?
Well, when you think that Bob Sutherland came forward after just seeing a bit, I am expecting quite the response. One of the things I learned from the American radio shows was people wanted to know how to see this. And this is a monstrous country, with 300 million people, and then Mexico is big, and DirecTV has made it happen. And for the first two people I talked to, one from Mexico and one my own wife, the first thing they mentioned was, "My goodness, this where I'm getting calls," because people just look up Bowen Island and they can find me.
Yeah.
And I'm not hiding, but so it looks like when it looks like this next year is crucial, and I am going to do everything I can in Canada now. It's now that Bob's story's out, now that the people of Vancouver know about his son, I will be talking to the public and showing them in Canada and working with people in a little more open way. And I truly believe that that the conundrum that NASA's in with Phenomena 2 and Dr. Louis Frank is they're going to have to do the same thing and say, yes, this phenomena is there, but we don't know what it is. And if we put then I think everybody can weigh in with their theories on what it is.
Now,
and I'm sure they'll say, oh, those don't make sense and those don't make sense. But we will have made an incredible breakthrough because it'll allow more and more and more people to contribute to our discussion.
Rome wasn't built as a day.
No, and I have patience. A lot of patience.
Now, you've also, over the years, been patiently collecting a whole host of news clippings, information, snippets, emails on one thing and another.
It drives my wife crazy.
And you've kindly agreed to share these with us, and these will be introduced in the fullness of time.
Yes.
I'm interested in that we're going to show a news clipping now, and this is a news clipping which appeared in Canada relating to STS-75. As far as we can tell, this information, which came from an accredited press agency,
It's stunning.
hasn't appeared anywhere else.
No.
Two questions stem from that. First of all, this news clipping is referring to STS-75, the stranded tether. It's talking about these extraordinary circumstances in which, when NASA scientists on the ground re-established contact with the satellite, they found curious things had happened to it, its internal mechanisms and such like. But secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, why is it that this, and we've got many, many other examples
Yes.
of information that has quite clearly stemmed from NASA, not been picked up by other countries, not least in America itself?
I think because it is the smoking gun. I truly think that's the answer. And end of statement. It's the smoking gun. And it's not. You can go on NASA's website and it's not there.
It might be the end of the statement, and I accept that, but let me just put another point to you, because you've not really answered the question as to how it's possible
Yes.
for statements like that to appear in the Canadian press, but not in the US press and elsewhere. What is it, why is it that this information, which is absolutely astonishing,
it's astonishing,
is appearing in Canada,
yeah,
and yet not in America?
Well, I don't think I'm qualified to give the answer other than to just suggest it's deliberate. And just as the most recent information didn't appear anywhere else either, which is about what the tether is doing. And I'm sure that UFO magazine will tell that story too. It's extraordinary, and it makes the tether sequence, the additional information that we have makes the tether sequence even more smoking. It's flaming.
Because it's clear, isn't it, now, from the information
Yes.
that was gleaned by Russell Callahan and presented during his lecture at
Yes.
the Leeds conference in September 2001,
Unbelievable.
that this isn't your ordinary kind of experimental tether. Indeed, this isn't an experiment that is necessarily isolated either.
Correct.
That there could indeed be, if you like, offshoots of
Yes.
this kind of experiment involved
There are.
with other satellites.
There are.
Tell us a little bit about these other offshoots, if you like.
Well, the other offshoots are the National Post, which is Canada's new national newspaper, printed a story about how they were cleaning up space debris using a small satellite or something. They fuzzified it a bit, the art of fuzzification. And when you put that right beside the information that Russell Callahan came out with, it really is spooky, because basically I think we forced them through the tether to come up with something. And
do you not find that the terminology also points in that direction? Because we're talking about, in the latter case here, we're talking about some killer form of system.
They use these.
But the actual description of the tethered satellite, which of course we've been talking about and showing and discussing for the past 2 years, that Russell Callahan produced, it was described as the killer Terminator.
Yes, I couldn't believe the terms. It was suicide satellite, killer Terminator, etc.
The Terminator.
Yeah.
But killer, Terminator, it doesn't exactly engender feelings or visions of some kind of peaceful use of an experiment in space when you describe the tethered satellite as the Terminator.
Exactly. And they're claiming that that this is just wandering around the space, or this or they, and that it's somehow recognizing space debris and is bringing it down. And then they illustrated it with the circle of the Earth with all kinds of little dots saying this is how much space debris there is. This is absolutely ridiculous. And and here it was. In fact, it was on the front page. Front page of our national newspaper.
And yet it's not on the front page, the inside page,
No.
the back page of our fish and chip paper, if you will.
I know.
Anywhere.
I know. And
Now,
this is that salt theory again, where they throw these things out, and if you don't connect what we learned at the 20th Leads conference with this new information, you wouldn't probably. Most people I talked to about it, let me just say, most people I talked to about it just accepted it. Oh, there's something they sent up. Oh, there's something they have, and it's going to clean up space. I mean, the whole story is bizarre, especially with these terms. These terms are so ominous.
Something equally bizarre, if not more so, and again relating back to how information, for some reason, we don't know why, is surfacing in the United States through the Canadian press and media in general, relates to the very first ever mission for the International Space Station.
Yes. Well, that was really interesting. It was on election night, and most of our Canadian television stations are domestic feeds from America, and I got pretty tired of it is George W. or is Al Gore the president. And so I turned over to the Discovery Channel, and they do a report, a national report every night, and they were talking about and showing pictures of the very first official crew on the International Space Station Alpha, and they explained that they'd been arguing all day. They'd been hostile, very hostile. Now, first of all, it shocked me they were talking about this, and then they were saying that that part of the hostility was because the astronauts had seen something coming towards the shuttle, and they thought they were going to be hit, and they were arguing about this with the ground. Now, where this gets interesting is, currently, the ISS space station has no windows, so the astronauts. The first crew's only access to sea space is through a television monitor. So they were looking at what the smoking gun tape has on it. You know, these things, strange things coming. And of course, they were really angry and asking, why weren't we warned? What should we do? And they were getting from the ground, basically, there is nothing. And they were so angry by the end of the day. They couldn't even find their sleeping material. They were even arguing about the sleeping bags or whatever they use. I mean, basically, just to sum it up, it was one hostile crew. Didn't get in the American news because of this huge problem they had over who's president. I was just stunned at the report, especially knowing the background of hostilities, which go back to why Bob Sutherland and Dr. Weinberg got together, but the hostilities now aren't about depression, and they're not about. They were literally arguing about is there or isn't there something outside of the ISS Alpha space station, and it's extraordinary when you think that the astronauts were seeing what the people have been seeing on the tapes, because they had no other way of seeing it. And so it was just an extraordinary report. Got lost, of course, in all the news, all of the presidential stuff.
Tell us about James Ober, because he was doing a narration for a Canadian astronaut.
Yes. Well, James Ober is very, very interesting. This is very bizarre. Again, James, when Chris Hadfield just recently was the first Canadian spacewalker. That's very, very big in our smaller country of under 30 million. And the national network covered it live. And of course I wanted to see how they would cover it, and I was also a proud Canadian. And so I tuned it in, and they have their standard news fellow there, and they've hired James Oberg as the commentator for the mission. Now that's like a fox in the hen house, isn't it? It was extraordinary, and I was just, I couldn't believe it. Of all the people in the world they could have had and there's a lot with knowledge of the space station, James Oberg, the #1 debunker in the world of everything to do with space. And of course, they introduced him. This is another interesting thing. They introduced him as a former NASA employee, and he didn't correct them. Whereas he's always saying in other places, well, you're falsely accusing me of being a NASA employee when I wasn't a NASA employee, and blah, 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 blah. He had a chance to correct it, and he didn't. I've got all this on tape. And then the other thing was, at some point in the discussion, they asked him, do you know anything about film or video or how many frames or anything like that? He says, I don't know anything about that kind of stuff. Nothing whatsoever. Got that on tape. Then the third shocking thing was that now NASA is downloading on what is called the S-band, and that really means still pictures. And even the headlines in our paper had this statement by Chris Hadfield when he walked out and we saw him exit the spacecraft in a still photo. No space, just him against the background. And yet he was going, wow, what an incredible view! And they literally, that's the headline that followed it. And yet we never saw any incredible view, even though the helmet cameras were built in Canada. And the whole mission for 3 hours, because the networks, you know, gave 3 hours to this, even though it was a little longer spacewalk. The S-band, they kept, and James Oberg was there saying, well, you see, they can't really get the signal down on the K-band, and they can't even reach it, and blah, blah, blah. And I've been following this thing since 1973, and they can do everything. And it was just extraordinary. And then every once in a while, when there was just a picture that was just impossible, just a close-up, you'd see some movement. So, and then it would go still again. This whole sequence is unreal.
So you had 3 hours of still images
Still
on
images,
there.
and the most incredible part of all is the news readers, the national news, the papers, everybody just accepted it. There was not anybody questioning, how come we didn't see them moving around? It was, that's how I think the public doesn't really know much about what's going on up there. They haven't seen it, so they accepted that this is what comes off the satellite. And here's James Oberg, you know, literally giving the most bizarre explanation for why they couldn't get it, the signal. I mean, this is the most important event in Canadian space history. The first spacewalk. When you think we've waited this long to get us to go into space. And he was assembling the Canadarm2, which is a spider-like arm as big as the shuttle that's going to walk around the International Space Station. So it was a very crucial, important mission. And I've, by the way, started to, you know, continue to look into space on behalf of everybody, rather than depend on other individuals who said that they would do it for me. I reported before, well, there's other individuals, but I just decided to do it myself. And they have now, this S-band, this still picture image thing is what pretty much they're only putting out. And, you know, I offer my apologies to the world for screwing this whole thing up. But they've definitely learned how to keep us from seeing Space Phenomena 1. And Space Phenomena 2, they're piggybacking the signal. It's video compression is the big thing now. And the way it works is they can send a number of signals on one signal. And they do that by taking frames out of the picture, and then they replace it with sort of almost the same frame. And sometimes you see, you know, the astronauts doing this kind of thing. So they think that that's how they can defeat anybody from finding phenomena too, because you really have to have a complete sequence of frames, and then you have to split those frames. There's no such thing as a complete sequence of frames coming down. They've been profoundly affected by what the Smoking Gun tape, by what UFO magazine, Bob Sutherland, myself, Lou Frank, and other scientists that we will name, but we can't name at this time. And I, again, know, just based on what's happened so far, that that due to the direct TV, the fact the United States is seeing it, there'll be a heck of a discussion going on, that we will get more and more people of scientific credentials and regular people that have worked around space, NASA, etc., coming forward.
Can I ask finally, Martyn?
Yes. Yes.
If there was one thing that you would, if you could have one wish, away from the sort of personal nature of things, but focusing, if you like, on the secret NASA transmissions material, what would that be?
Well, sounds crazy, but if they could send Tito up to the space station, and he said it was no big deal, I would like to go up to the International Space Station and see for myself. I really, really would like that. Of course, I don't believe it'll happen, but that would be my wish, really.
Let's hope it comes true. Martyn Stubbs, thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham.